The Galactic Concord was supposed to be a beacon of unity, a testament to the cooperation of countless species spanning thousands of star systems. At least, that's what humanity had been led to believe. For over a century, the Terran Federation had fought tooth and nail to prove itself worthy of a seat at the table. They adhered to Concord laws, contributed to joint research efforts, and even provided troops for so-called peacekeeping operations. Humanity had built trade alliances, established embassies, and worked within the system. They had trusted the process, but the process had never been meant to include them. The official declaration came without warning. At the Grand Council of the Concord, amidst the towering spires of the Celestial Hall on Valtora Prime, humanity was condemned before the eyes of the galaxy. A Xelzar representative, one of the cold-blooded reptilian overlords who ruled the council, stood before the assembly, his scaled visage unreadable as he pronounced the verdict. Humanity has proven itself incapable of integration. Their expansion is unchecked, their ambitions dangerous. They seek not peace, but dominion. Therefore, by unanimous decree of the Concord Council, the Terran Federation is to be sanctioned. Earth and its colonies are to be placed under indefinite quarantine. Trade privileges are revoked. No Concord species shall come to their aid. Their borders are closed. Their fleets disbanded. Their people abandoned. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered diplomats. Some species, like the timid insectoid Girani, looked away in shame. Others, like the predatory war-born Hrathani, simply smirked. But none spoke out against the decision. None objected as humanity was cast out. Then came the final insult. Ambassador Elias Rourke, humanity's representative, rose to his feet in protest. "This is madness. We have upheld every treaty. We have honored every pact. You cannot." The Xelzar waved a clawed hand, and two heavily armed Concord guards flanked Rourke in an instant. The chamber's security field activated, blocking all transmissions. The ambassador looked around, desperate for an ally, but found none. The Xelzar's voice was cold and final. "Humanity is no longer part of the Concord. Your protests are meaningless." A single shot rang out. The plasma round burned straight through Rourke's chest, silencing him mid-sentence. He fell without another word, his lifeless body slumping against the marble floor of the Celestial Hall. No one moved to help him. The broadcast was cut. Across human space, those watching from afar, politicians, soldiers, civilians, stared in horror as the screen went dark. The message was clear. Earth and its people had been condemned. Within days, the blockade began. Concord warships surrounded Sol, cutting it off from the rest of the galaxy. Human colonies were left stranded, their supply lines severed. The outer settlements, too small to be self-sufficient, faced slow starvation. And then the raids began. The Xelzar called them containment measures, but they were nothing less than extermination campaigns. And yet, in the face of this betrayal, humanity did not break. It burned. It raged. And deep within the void, amidst the abandoned colonies and exiled fleets, the first whispers of vengeance began to take shape. Humanity would not kneel. It would rise. And the stars would bleed for what had been done to them. Nova Terra had been one of humanity's proudest achievements. A thriving colony on the edge of known space, a symbol of their growing place among the stars. Its towering spires stood tall against the orange skies of the planet, and its orbital docks bustled with trade ships. Before the betrayal, it had been a hub of commerce, connecting human ingenuity with the larger galactic economy. Now, it was alone. When the blockade was announced, Nova Terra's governor, Elias Voss, had immediately called for reinforcements. None came. Every human fleet had been grounded, every line of communication severed. The moment Concord forces deemed the embargo a failure, they changed tactics. They came to erase Nova Terra. The attack began with fire from the sky. Xelzar warships, sleek, black vessels bristling with plasma cannons, descended from orbit like reapers of death. Their opening salvo reduced the colony's outer defenses to slag. Power grids flickered, and entire districts were engulfed in flames. Within hours, the city was a battlefield. Concord shock troops landed in waves, marching through the streets in gleaming armor, their energy rifles cutting down any who resisted. But humanity had learned from history. They had seen what happened to those who surrendered. They had heard the screams of fallen colonies where civilians were processed for the good of the Concord. So Novaterra did not surrender. Governor Voss took command of the defense personally. "We die on our feet," he growled into the comms, rallying his people. Miners turned their excavation drills into makeshift artillery. Engineers jury-rigged power stations into electromagnetic pulse traps. Farmers and merchants wielded stolen Concord weapons, ambushing patrols in the alleyways. The streets ran red with Selzar blood. The Concord had expected an easy victory, a routine pacification. What they got instead was a nightmare. In the underground tunnels that ran beneath Novaterra, human operatives moved like ghosts. Dressed in scavenged armor, they struck fast and vanished before retaliation could come. Explosive-laden cargo transports rammed into enemy command centers. Snipers, hidden in collapsed buildings, picked off officers one by one. Concord troops, bred for orderly battlefield engagements, found themselves torn apart by the chaos of guerrilla warfare. After 72 hours of brutal combat, the first Selzar ship tried to retreat. It never made it past the atmosphere. Novaterra's engineers had reactivated the colony's railgun platforms, long considered outdated relics. Now those relics shredded enemy vessels into burning debris. One by one, the remaining Concord ships turned tail and fled. Against all odds, Novaterra had survived. But victory came at a cost. Half the colony lay in ruins. Thousands were dead, including most of the original planetary defense force. And Governor Voss, the man who had held the line, had been mortally wounded. His blood soaked the command console as his officers gathered around him, waiting for his final orders. He used what little strength remained to etch a single phrase into the steel of his chair with his combat knife. No more kneeling. The survivors would remember those words. They would carry them across the stars. And soon, all of humanity would swear by them. The blood oath had begun. Word of Novaterra's stand spread like wildfire. Humanity's colonies, isolated and cut off, had assumed they were alone, that no one would come for them. But Novaterra had fought, and won. A single colony had defied the will of the Galactic Concord, and now the embers of defiance burned in every Terran world. The Selzar called it an anomaly, a desperate, futile struggle. But among the survivors, among those who had fought and bled on Novaterra's shattered streets, it was something more. It was a promise. In the heart of Novaterra's ruined capital, amidst the rubble of the governor's command center, the survivors gathered. There were no speeches, no ceremonies. Just the weight of loss hanging heavy in the smoke-filled air. They stood shoulder to shoulder, soldiers, engineers, miners, civilians, united not by rank, but by grief, by rage. A bloodied officer, his uniform torn and caked in ash, stepped forward. Captain Adrian Vale, the last surviving commander of Novaterra's defense, had led the final push against the Concord troops. He had seen Governor Voss die. He had watched friends and family cut down in the streets, and he had come to one inescapable conclusion. There was no future for humanity under the Concord. We swore oaths before. Vale spoke, voiced hoarse from battle. Oaths to serve, to build, to be part of something greater. The Concord made fools of us. They slaughtered our people and called it justice. He reached into his belt and pulled out a combat knife, still stained with Selzar blood. Without hesitation, he drew the blade across his palm, letting crimson drops fall onto the scorched earth beneath him. No more kneeling. One by one, the survivors followed. Soldiers and civilians alike took the knife, slashed their palms, and let their blood mix with the soil of Novaterra. They swore, not as a colony, not as a government, but as a people. They would never bow again. They would never be at the mercy of alien overlords. This was more than revenge. This was war. Within days, encrypted messages carrying the oath spread through hidden channels across human space. Colonists on the frozen wastelands of Helium Prime, smugglers in the lawless void of the Outer Belt, soldiers abandoned in distant war zones, all heard the call. It was no longer about survival. Humanity would not be erased, and the galaxy would bleed for what had been done to them. The first to answer the call were the lost fleets, scattered remnants of humanity's navy, once forced into hiding after the blockade, began to reassemble. Officers who had once obeyed Concord laws now swore new allegiances. Their ships, battered and outdated, were reforged into weapons of vengeance. On a distant moon, former industrial workers seized an abandoned Concord shipyard, converting it into a hidden weapons forge. In the depths of space, a stolen Selzar destroyer was repainted, its insignia stripped away, its new name carved into the hull. Retribution. The Terran Reclamation Front was born. No negotiations, no pleas for recognition. Only war. The Galactic Concord expected humanity to fight like fools, rushing into open war, desperate and reckless. They had seen countless species fall that way, crushed under the weight of superior firepower. But humanity had learned from history. They had studied every war, every uprising, every rebellion. And they knew one thing above all. The Concord could not be fought head-on. Not yet. The first strike came in the dead of night on Velar Prime, a heavily fortified supply world deep in Concord territory. A Selzar governor ruled the planet from a grand citadel, surrounded by elite guards, planetary defense systems, and automated security drones. He was untouchable, or so he thought. He never heard the shot that killed him. A single high-velocity round pierced the thick, reinforced glass of his private chamber, striking him cleanly between his eyes. The assassin, her name long erased from Concord records, slipped away unseen, vanishing into the darkness. When the guards stormed the chamber, they found his blood splattered across the wall behind him. Etched into the glass with the tip of a combat knife was a single phrase, written in his own blood. No more kneeling. That was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, humanity's vengeance unfolded in brutal, calculated strikes. Concord outposts were hacked and shut down remotely, their own security turrets turning against them. Weapons caches exploded without warning. High-ranking officials vanished, their bodies never found. Entire supply convoys were lured into asteroid fields where hidden Terran ships lay in wait, turning them into burning wreckage before disappearing into the void. The Concord fleets, built for overwhelming force, struggled against an enemy they couldn't see. Selzar admirals sent entire battle groups after phantom signals, chasing ghosts through hyperspace. The Concord's command structure, once untouchable, fractured under the weight of uncertainty and fear. On a cold, barren moon orbiting the gas giant Seldros 4, a Concord research station held hundreds of human prisoners, scientists, soldiers, and civilians taken after the blockade. The Concord's official stance was that they were being processed for reintegration. In reality, they were test subjects, used for biological experiments, cybernetic augmentation trials, and live weapons testing. The Terran Reclamation Front found them. A stolen Concord freighter, its transponder codes intact, drifted toward the station. The guards, expecting a routine supply drop, lowered the station's defense grid for docking. They didn't realize their mistake until the freighter's cargo bay doors blasted open and heavily armed human operatives stormed inside. The battle was over in minutes. No prisoners were taken. The scientists who had overseen the experiments were found cowering in their labs, pleading for mercy. They received none. The TRF didn't just rescue the prisoners. They took everything: data, technology, weapons, anything that could be turned against the Concord. Then they left the station behind, its power cores set to overload. From the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Adrian Vale watched as the moon itself cracked, the explosion visible even from orbit. "This is only the beginning," he muttered. Humanity would not fight for survival anymore. They would fight to win. The Galactic Concord had underestimated humanity once. They would not be given a second chance. With every strike, the Terran Reclamation Front grew stronger. Captured weapons were reverse-engineered. Sabotaged Concord vessels were salvaged and reforged into warships. Forgotten colonies, long abandoned to their fate, rose in defiance. What had begun as scattered resistance was becoming something more, an organized, relentless campaign of retribution. But humanity knew they could not stay in the shadows forever. Eventually, the Concord would bring its full might to bear. The TRF needed a statement, a battle that would show the galaxy that humanity was not merely a resistance movement. They were an army. Their target was the fortress world of Thorin Vex. Located near the heart of Concord-controlled space, Thorin Vex was a military stronghold, a key logistical hub for the Selzar war machine. It was heavily defended, its skies patrolled by Concord dreadnoughts, and its surface lined with anti-orbital cannons. No sane commander would dare assault it. Adrian Vale was no ordinary commander. From the bridge of the Retribution, he watched as the fleet formed up around him. Salvaged human warships, stolen Concord frigates, and even repurposed cargo haulers now retrofitted for combat. It was a ragtag force, but it had something the Concord never would: rage. "This isn't just a raid," Vale told his officers. "We're taking that planet. And when the Concord looks up at the sky, they won't see invaders. They'll see the storm they created." The assault began with deception. A small TRF strike team infiltrated the planet, planting explosive charges along the planetary defense grid. When the main fleet arrived, the system's defense platforms turned to fire, only to erupt in flames, their own power cores detonated by hidden saboteurs. With the planetary shields down, the Terran fleet surged forward. Concord ships scrambled to respond, but the TRF was already upon them. Fighters swarmed like angry hornets, weaving through enemy formations, targeting engine cores and weapons arrays with ruthless precision. Frigates moved in coordinated strike groups, overwhelming the larger Selzar battleships with speed and firepower. And then came the ground assault. Drop pods rained from the sky, slamming into the fortress city of Vex's Prime. TRF Marines poured into the streets, fighting house to house, their movements precise and brutal. Civilians, long oppressed under Selzar rule, rose up to join the fight. The Selzar commanders, bred for wars of conquest, found themselves unprepared for an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. They expected submission. Instead, they found humans with nothing left to lose. By the time the smoke cleared, Thorin Vex was burning. The fortress city lay in ruins, its governor executed, its command structure shattered. The TRF had not only taken the planet, they had sent a message. For the first time in history, the Galactic Concord had lost a core world. As the TRF flag was raised over the ruins of the governor's palace, Adrian Vale turned to his officers. "This is war," he said, "and we are just getting started." The fall of Thorin Vex sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Never before had a species cast out by the Galactic Concord risen to reclaim what was theirs. Humanity had not only survived, they had struck a wound so deep that even the most powerful Concord members could no longer ignore them. In the Concord High Council chambers on Valtora Prime, the Selzar warlords convened in a rare emergency session. "The humans have overstepped," hissed Overlord Sirek, his golden scales gleaming under the chamber's harsh lighting. "They were meant to be broken, scattered. Instead, they have taken Thorin Vex. They defy us." His slitted eyes narrowed. "We cannot allow this infection to spread." The decision was made within minutes. Humanity would not be hunted in the shadows any longer. The full force of the Concord Armada would be unleashed. Within a week, the counterattack began. A Concord battle fleet, one of the largest assembled in over a century, was dispatched toward Thorin Vex. Hundreds of warships, including 3 planet-cracking dreadnoughts, surged through hyperspace, their weapons primed to turn the rebellious world into a wasteland. But the TRF was ready. Adrian Vale and his commanders knew the Concord would not let their victory stand. As the first enemy ships emerged from slip space, the TRF activated their defenses. Deep in the ruins of Thorin Vex, engineers had reactivated long-dormant planetary ion cannons, relics of an age before the Concord's rule. The first shot lanced through the void, striking Excelsior battlecruiser and reducing it to slag before its shields could even react. Then, the real battle began. The skies above Thorin Vex became a firestorm as Terran warships clashed with the Concord Armada. The TRF, though vastly outnumbered, fought like demons. Human strike craft darted between enemy formations, launching precision bombing runs on capital ships. Salvaged Concord destroyers, now bearing the sigil of the Reclamation Front, turned on their former masters, unleashing volleys of plasma fire into their ranks. But the Concord was relentless. The Excelsior dreadnought Vengeance of Kor moved into position, its massive cannons charging to full power. One shot from its primary weapon could crack continents. The TRF had nothing that could match its sheer destructive might. Vale knew it had to be stopped. From the bridge of the Retribution, he made a call to a single TRF ship hidden among the wreckage of a destroyed station, an old Concord battleship repurposed for one last mission. Its name, the Defiant. Its captain, a scared veteran named Helena Ross, answered. Vale's order was simple: end that dreadnought. The Defiant surged forward at full burn, evading enemy fire as it pushed toward the Vengeance of Kor. With every gun on the Concord fleet focusing on it, Roz and her crew made the ultimate choice. They overloaded their core, turning the Defiant into a missile. The last transmission from Roz came through the comms. For Earth, for all of us. The explosion ripped through the Vengeance of Kor, splitting it apart in a supernova of fire and debris. The battle raged on, but the TRF had struck another impossible blow. The Concord fleet faltered. Humanity was still standing. And the war was far from over. The destruction of the Vengeance of Kor sent shockwaves through the Concord ranks. Never in recorded history had a species outside their control managed to obliterate one of their planet-cracking dreadnoughts. The loss was devastating, not just militarily, but psychologically. The illusion of Concord invincibility was shattered. But the battle for Thorin Vex was not over. The remaining Concord fleet regrouped, pouring relentless fire onto the TRF's defensive lines. Orbital bombardments reduced entire city blocks to craters. TRF warships fought valiantly, but for every Concord vessel they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The sheer weight of numbers was suffocating. On the surface, the situation was even worse. Concord shock troops, genetically engineered for war, advanced through the ruins like a relentless tide. Zeldar war machines stalked the streets, cutting down human fighters with cold efficiency. For every TRF soldier that fell, a dozen civilians were slaughtered in retaliation. In the war room beneath the shattered remains of the governor's palace, Adrian Vale and his commanders faced an impossible choice. "We can't hold them forever," said Commander Rourke, bloodied and exhausted. "We're down to half our fleet. We've lost 3 city districts. If we stay, we die." Vale's gaze was cold and unyielding. "Then we don't stay." A hush fell over the room. "We hold them here as long as we can," Vale continued, "long enough for our people to evacuate. Then we abandon the planet. We let them have this graveyard." His voice darkened. "But we make sure they pay for every step they take." The order went out. Across the city, surviving TRF forces fell back to pre-planned extraction points. Transports, hidden beneath ruined infrastructure, powered up their engines. The fleet prepared for an emergency hyperspace jump. But humanity would not leave quietly. As Concord troops pushed deeper into the city, hidden charges planted weeks prior began to detonate. Entire streets collapsed, swallowing enemy squads in fire and debris. Fuel depots erupted into towering infernos, incinerating whole battalions. The planet's underground power grid was set to overload, sending arcs of deadly energy through the enemy's war machines. The final blow came from orbit. The Retribution, leading what remained of the TR fleet, fired its main railgun one last time, not at the enemy, but at the planet itself. The shot ruptured a dormant fault line beneath the capital. The ground trembled. Then it split. Concord forces still on the surface had no time to react as an earthquake ripped through their ranks, swallowing tanks, soldiers, and entire structures into the abyss. By the time the last TRF transport lifted off, the ruins of Thorin Vex were unrecognizable. As the fleet made its escape, Vale stood on the bridge, watching the burning world fade into the void. He clenched his fists. This wasn't a loss, he said. This was a message. The Concord had thrown everything at humanity. They had burned their cities, massacred their people. And yet, humanity still lived. And now, the Concord had something far worse than a rebellion on their hands. They had a reckoning. The fall of Thorin Vex was supposed to be the end of the war. The Concord had believed that with enough firepower, enough brutality, humanity would break. But they had miscalculated. The Terran Reclamation Front had not been crushed. It had been reforged. Word of the battle spread across the stars. The news was smuggled into the darkest corners of the galaxy, whispered in back alleys, broadcast through encrypted signals. A species the Concord had cast aside had risen up and struck them down, not once, but again and again, and others were watching. For centuries, countless races had suffered beneath the Concord's rule. They had bent the knee, believing resistance was futile. But humanity had shown them another path. The rebellion spread. On the mining world of Skelisphore, enslaved laborers revolted, overpowering their Concord overseers and taking control of the planet's vast resource depots. In the distant Velos system, a rogue fleet of exiled warriors, aliens once betrayed by the Concord, declared allegiance to humanity's cause. Even within the ranks of the Concord itself, dissent grew. Some commanders, tired of endless war, began questioning their orders. The galaxy was unraveling. But the final act had yet to be written. The TRF, now more than just a resistance, was ready to strike the heart of the enemy. Their target, Voltora Prime, the Concord's central command world. It was where the High Council ruled, where fleets were coordinated, where humanity's genocide had been ordered. Vale knew this battle would be different. There would be no retreat, no fallback plan. This was the moment that would decide humanity's fate. The attack came without warning. The TRF fleet, bolstered by defectors and rebels, emerged from hyperspace in a chaotic formation, overwhelming the orbital defenses before the Concord could react. Concord warships scrambled to meet them, but they were fighting a different enemy now. These humans did not fear them. They did not hesitate. They struck with fury, their ships darting through enemy lines like knives through flesh. On the surface, drop pods rained down upon the Concord's grand citadel, shattering its pristine halls of power. Human soldiers and their alien allies stormed through the corridors, cutting through defenders with ruthless precision. At the heart of the citadel, Overlord Sarek stood in defiance, his golden scales dulled with age, his once arrogant gaze now filled with disbelief. He had underestimated humanity from the beginning. And now, as Adrian Vale strode toward him, weapon drawn, he realized his mistake too late. Sarek bared his fangs. "You think this changes anything? The Concord is eternal. Even if you kill me, we will hunt you down. We will burn your worlds to ash." Vale didn't blink. "You tried." And then he pulled the trigger. The war did not end in that moment. The Concord did not collapse overnight, but the fall of Voltora Prime shattered their grip on the galaxy. One by one, their dominion crumbled. The Terran Reclamation Front became more than a rebellion. It became a revolution. Humanity had risen from extinction, and the galaxy would never be the same.